He sat alone
It's okay,
at the corner
kids.
table.
Mommy will
The
be here
blind
soon,
big chair
and we're all
still
together
empty after
now.
40 minutes.
Let's enjoy our
Until
time.
4 children stood in front of him and said the words that would shatter his past, test his heart, and rewrite his future forever. Our mommy's sorry she's late. If you believe second chances don't come wrapped in chaos, if you believe love doesn't wait for perfect timing, then this story will stay with you long after the final line. Right finger subscribe now for emotional, real-life inspired stories that hit the heart, twist the soul, and remind us why hope is never wasted. He checked his watch for the 4th time in 10 minutes, not because he was impatient, but because old habits from the military never really died. They just waited quietly for moments like this, when silence stretched too long and the world felt uncertain. The cafe was warm, softly lit, the kind of place couples came to pretend they weren't nervous, but Mark Callahan sat alone at a table meant for two, hands folded around a mug he hadn't touched. The chair across from him was empty. 40 minutes late. He told himself it didn't matter. Blind dates were always a gamble, and after everything he'd survived, 2 tours overseas, an IED that took 3 men he loved like brothers, a marriage that didn't survive the man he became afterward, this was supposed to be easy. Just coffee. Just conversation. Just proof that he could still try. The waitress had already given him that sympathetic smile twice, the one that said she'd seen this movie before and knew how it usually ended. Mark didn't look at her anymore. He focused on the door, on the quiet hum of voices, on not letting disappointment harden into something heavier. He thought about his daughter, Lily, 8 years old and wise beyond her years, probably finishing her homework at his sister's place where she'd insisted he leave her. "You deserve one night," Lily had said, tying his shoelaces with fierce determination. "Even heroes get lonely." He hadn't corrected her. Veterans didn't always feel like heroes, especially the ones who came home breathing. He'd shaved carefully for this date, worn the blue button-down Lily liked because it made him look less sad, and rehearsed answers to questions he hoped wouldn't come. "Why are you single? How long has it been? Are you okay?" He wasn't sure what he'd say if she asked about the nightmares, or the way loud bangs still made his hands shake, or the guilt that came with surviving when others didn't. Maybe she wouldn't ask anything at all. Maybe she'd never show. Just as he was about to signal for the check, just as resignation settled into his chest like an old ache, the cafe door opened again, but instead of a woman scanning the room nervously, 4 children walked in, lined up like ducklings, ranging from maybe 4 to 10 years old. They stopped just inside the entrance, whispering urgently to one another, eyes sweeping the room until the oldest spotted him. The girl nudged the boy beside her, nodded toward Mark's table, and suddenly all 4 of them were walking straight toward him with a purpose that made his stomach tighten. He glanced behind him, expecting them to veer away at the last second, but they didn't. They stopped right at his table, staring up at him with a mixture of apology, curiosity, and something that looked suspiciously like hope. The oldest girl cleared her throat the way adults did when they were pretending not to be nervous. Excuse me, sir." Mark stood halfway, instinctively polite. "Can I help you?" The smallest boy clutched a worn dinosaur toy and hid behind the girl's leg. Another boy crossed his arms, suspicious and protective. The girl swallowed, then said the words that would echo in Mark's head for years to come. "Our mommy's sorry she's late." For a moment, the cafe disappeared. The hum, the clink of dishes, even the ache in his knee from an old shrapnel wound faded into nothing. "I think you've got the wrong table," Mark said gently, already preparing to smile it off, already bracing for embarrassment. But the girl shook her head. "No, you're Mark. Mommy said you'd be wearing a blue shirt and that you'd look kind of sad but nice." His breath caught. The description was too accurate to be coincidence. "She said if she wasn't back in 5 minutes, we should come tell you she didn't forget." Before he could ask another question, the cafe door flew open again, and this time, the woman who stood there looked like she'd run the entire way. Her hair was pulled back messily, her coat half-buttoned, her eyes wide with panic as they locked onto her children. Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by mortification when she saw Mark standing beside them. "I am so sorry," she said, breathless, rushing forward. "I told them to stay put, I swear. The babysitter, she didn't show, and then my neighbor was late, and I didn't want to cancel again, and," she stopped, hands flying to her face. "I completely understand if you want to leave." Mark looked at the 4 kids, then back at the woman whose eyes were shining with unshed tears. He thought of Lily. He thought of missed chances. He pulled out the chair across from him and said quietly, "Why don't you sit down? All of you. We were just getting to the interesting part anyway." The children exchanged shocked glances. "Really?" the oldest asked. Mark nodded. "Really. The woman laughed weakly, a sound caught somewhere between gratitude and disbelief, and sank into the chair. "I'm Anna," she said. "And I promise, this is not how I usually do things." He smiled for the first time that night, a real one. "I'm Mark," he replied. "And I think this might be the most honest blind date I've ever had." What he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that this accidental meeting, this chaotic interruption, was about to uncover a shared past neither of them had healed from, and a future neither believed they deserved. The cafe never quite returned to normal after that, at least not for Mark, because once Anna sat down and her children squeezed themselves into chairs that suddenly seemed too small for the weight of the moment, the evening shifted from awkward anticipation into something raw and unexpectedly intimate. Apologies poured out of Anna in a rush. About schedules, about life, about how she almost cancelled but hadn't wanted to give up on the idea that something good could still surprise her. And Mark listened the way soldiers were trained to listen, quietly, attentively, filing away details without interrupting. He learned their names quickly because the children offered them eagerly, like credentials. Emma, the eldest, sharp-eyed and protective. Noah, 10, who watched Mark with cautious respect. Caleb, 7, all knees and elbows and questions, and little Rosie, 4, who climbed onto Anna's lap and promptly fell asleep as if the chaos had exhausted her mission. Anna's voice softened when she talked to them, and Mark noticed how the lines of stress on her face eased when Rosie's head tucked under her chin. It was a look he recognized, parenthood etched into muscle memory. They ordered pastries meant for sharing and hot chocolates that left mustaches on the kids' lips. The waitress, now beaming instead of pitying, brought extra napkins without being asked. Mark found himself laughing when Caleb asked if he was a real soldier or just a pretend one, and answering honestly, carefully, saying he used to be one and now he fixed things at a local veterans clinic. Anna's eyes flickered at that, a quick, almost imperceptible pause. That Mark caught because he was trained to notice small changes. "My brother went there," she said lightly, then redirected Emma when she started asking about tanks. Mark didn't push. He never pushed. Time slid forward in that strange way it does when the room grows smaller around you and the rest of the world politely steps aside. Anna told him about teaching 4th grade, about grading papers after the kids fell asleep, about the guilt that clung to her like damp clothes whenever she felt overwhelmed. Mark spoke about Lily, about her fierce loyalty, about learning how to braid hair badly and pack lunches creatively. He didn't mention the nights when the walls felt too close or the dreams that snapped him awake. Not yet. When the kids grew restless, Mark surprised himself by standing up and performing a silly salute that made Rosie giggle in her sleep and Noah crack a smile he tried to hide. Anna watched him with a look that was half wonder, half calculation, as if she were re-evaluating everything she thought she knew about chance. They walked out together under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, the children marching ahead like a small, determined parade. Anna apologized again at the curb, cheeks flushed. "I don't expect anything," she said quickly, words tumbling. "Tonight was not normal." Mark shrugged, a gesture that felt lighter than it used to. "Normal's overrated," he said. "Besides, I had company. That's more than I expected when I walked in." Emma turned back, studying him with a seriousness that made him straighten. "Are you going to see our mommy again?" she asked. Anna inhaled sharply. Mark met the girl's gaze. "If your mom would like that," he said. Anna nodded, relief loosening her shoulders. They exchanged numbers, a small, electric moment that felt like a promise neither dared name. The next weeks unfolded gently, like cautious steps across thin ice that held firm. Mark met Anna at parks and libraries, at school events where folding chairs squeaked and coffee was lukewarm. He learned that Anna's husband, Daniel, had been killed 8 years earlier in a roadside explosion while deployed, and that the word, widow, still felt like a foreign object in her mouth. She learned that Mark had lost his wife not to war but to the distance it carved into him afterward, that she'd left quietly, kindly, because loving him had started to feel like standing guard alone. Their stories braided together in shared silences and careful confessions. The children warmed to him quickly. Caleb insisted Mark watch his soccer games, Noah asked him for help with a model plane, Rosie fell asleep on his shoulder without asking permission, and Mark felt a slow, terrifying expansion in his chest. He tried to keep boundaries. He tried to remember that hope could be dangerous. But Lily noticed anyway. "You smile more," she said one night, matter of fact. He didn't deny it. The twist came on a Tuesday that began like any other. Mark was at the clinic when a name on a chart stopped him cold, Daniel Harper. He stared until the letters blurred, then forced himself to breathe. "That's my brother," Anna had said. He flipped the page. Combat-related injuries. Long-term complications. Scheduled consult. When Daniel walked in, Mark recognized him instantly, not from photos, but from memory. Years ago, in a dust-choked night overseas, Mark had been part of the convoy that responded too late. He remembered a man screaming a name, remembered the firelight on a face that looked nothing like the calm teacher Anna had described. Daniel looked older now, thinner, eyes shadowed by pain and something harder. When he saw Mark's name badge, his jaw tightened. Recognition flared, sharp and dangerous. They spoke in clipped sentences, professional and brittle. Daniel's injury had worsened, nerves damaged, mobility declining. He needed support, answers, and he carried anger like a second spine. After the appointment, Daniel stopped Mark in the hallway. "You don't get to play hero now," he said quietly. Mark swallowed. "I'm not trying to." Daniel laughed without humor. "You never are." The words landed heavy, carrying years of accusation Mark had never answered. He went home that night and stared at the ceiling, the old guilt roaring awake, whispering that he didn't deserve the warmth he'd found. Anna sensed the shift immediately. He cancelled once, then twice. When they finally talked, his voice was careful, distant. She asked if it was something she'd done. He said no. He didn't tell her about Daniel. He didn't tell her that loving her felt like trespassing on a life he'd helped break. Emma confronted him at the park, arms crossed just like Noah's had been that first night. "You're leaving," she said. Mark crouched to her level. "I don't want to," he replied honestly. "But sometimes wanting isn't enough." She frowned, unconvinced. "Mommy waited a long time," she said. "So did we." The breaking point came when Daniel collapsed at Anna's house during a family dinner Mark hadn't been invited to. The ambulance lights painted the walls red, and Anna rode up front, hands shaking, fear erasing every careful boundary she'd built. At the hospital, Mark appeared anyway, summoned by the clinic when Daniel was admitted. Their eyes met across the corridor, Anna's wide with shock, Mark's with resignation. "You," she whispered. He nodded, throat tight. The truth spilled out in fragments. The convoy, the night, the things that couldn't be undone. Anna listened, face pale, grief and gratitude warring inside her. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. Mark looked at the floor. "Because I didn't want to be another loss you had to carry." Daniel survived the night but not the storm that followed. Old wounds tore open, accusations flew. Mark stood his ground, accepting blame where it belonged and refusing it where it didn't. He apologized, not as a shield, but as a bridge. Anna watched her brother soften, just a little, enough to let go of the need to punish. In the quiet hours after, Anna found Mark sitting alone, hands clasped like that first night. "I don't know what happens now," she said. Mark looked up. "Me neither," he admitted. "But I'm here, if you want me." She took his hand, a simple act that felt monumental. "We've already survived worse," she said. "We can figure out the rest." The days after the hospital blurred into a quiet reckoning, the kind that didn't announce itself with drama but settled into the bones and demanded honesty. Daniel's recovery was slow, humbling him in ways war never had, and for the first time he let Mark visit without barbed comments or brittle silence. They talked about the night overseas in pieces, like men carefully lifting shards of glass so they wouldn't cut themselves again. Mark told him what he'd never told anyone, not the official report, but the truth that lived underneath it. The hesitation, the choice that had saved one life and cost another, the impossible math of survival. Daniel listened, jaw clenched, eyes wet but steady, and when he finally spoke it wasn't to accuse but to ask how Mark had carried it alone for so long. "You weren't supposed to," Daniel said hoarsely. "None of us were." The words didn't absolve Mark, but they loosened something locked tight inside him, a forgiveness that didn't erase the past but allowed a future to breathe. Anna moved through those weeks like someone relearning gravity. She watched Mark with her children, helping Emma study, tossing a ball with Noah in the fading light, letting Caleb sit on his shoulders at the fair. Holding Rosie when thunderstorms rattled the windows, and the fear that had guarded her heart began to lose its authority. She admitted her own truth one night after the kids were asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with cold tea between them. She told Mark how she'd built her life around being strong because strength felt safer than hope, how dating had felt like betrayal until the loneliness became louder than the guilt. Mark listened, eyes steady, and said what she needed to hear without trying to fix it. "Loving again doesn't erase what came before. It honors it." She cried then, quietly, and he didn't rush her. The final twist came not from pain but from choice. Lily met Anna and the kids on a crisp Saturday morning at the park, nerves jangling like wind chimes. Emma approached first, assessing. "So you're Lily," she said. Lily nodded. "So you're the boss," she replied, deadpan. Laughter broke the tension. The children found a rhythm quickly, orbiting one another with the natural ease of kids who understood loss without needing to name it. Mark watched from the bench, heart pounding with a fear deeper than any battlefield. This mattered. When Anna sat beside him, she took his hand openly, not caring who saw. "I'm not late anymore," she said softly. He smiled, the old sadness finally losing its grip. "Neither am I." Months later, in the same cafe where the blind date had almost ended in silence, Mark stood to speak at a veterans fundraiser Anna had helped organize. The room was full, families, teachers, children, and when he looked out, he saw the future he'd never allowed himself to imagine. He told a story about an empty chair, about unexpected company, about how healing often arrived disguised as chaos. He didn't call it love. He called it courage, the courage to sit and wait, to stay when it would be easier to leave, to forgive without forgetting. When he finished, Anna was crying, Emma was clapping the loudest, and Lily was beaming like she'd known all along. The proposal was simple, the way real promises often are. A quiet evening, kids asleep, a ring that wasn't expensive but was chosen with care. Mark knelt, hands steady, and said, "I can't promise perfect. But I can promise present." Anna said yes before he finished the sentence. The children piled onto them, laughter filling the room, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt whole, not because the past had been fixed, but because it had been faced together. Years later, Mark would sometimes return to that cafe alone, sit at the corner table, and watch the door. Not for longing, but for gratitude. Because once, when an empty chair threatened to send him home to his ghosts, 4 children had walked in and changed everything by telling the truth. Their mommy had been late, but love had been right on time.